Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Christian's Political Talks. I am your host, Christian, and today we have two special guests. Our first guest has a PhD in microbiology and was recently a part of the New South Wales Health COVID-19 Public Health Response Branch and is part of the Science Party branch in the Fusion Party. And now she is standing as their #1 candidate for the Senate seats of New South Wales in the 2022 federal election, Miss Andrea Leong.
Thank you, Christian.
And our second guest is a retired rocket scientist and part of the Secular Party branch. Now he is running as the #2 candidate for the Fusion Party in the Senate seats of New South Wales, Mr. Ian Bryce.
Hi, Christian. Good to be here.
So how are you guys doing today?
Yeah, doing well. I've just been at the school Strike for Climate rally in the Sydney CBD this morning. Great to see so many young people and supported by a lot of union movements as well out to support climate action.
Yes, I went to a student climate strike a few years ago. Good to see so many young ones. What's painful is the dichotomy between the older generation of conservatives who want to do nothing and the young generation of activists who do anything to get the planet right. So all I can rejoice in is that as the years go by, the young ones will move into the voting range, which will have to be a big improvement, I think.
Yes, well, this is actually my first time voting for a federal government, so hopefully all goes well for me as well, for my own political views, I suppose. Anyway, so why don't
I'm not sure, Christian, with your surname, your Christian name, so to speak, I gather that wasn't your choosing?
It's just my parents liked the name, really. Yeah, it's just, that's how I got the name Christian, but I'm not really a Christian, no. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, so I entered politics when I started, I got involved with the Science Party back when it was called the Future Party. And I was really excited about the possibility of looking long-term at issues and regulating the technologies of the future so that they enriched society and the economy instead of either just banning new technologies because we were scared of them or just opening them up as a free-for-all slather, which would tend to advantage the corporations that got a hold of them in the first case. So that was why I entered party politics after avoiding it all through university. Always been involved in causes, been behind the political causes that I cared about, but avoided party politics in uni. And then, 2014 got involved in the Future Party as it was known, and then it became the Science Party. And as the last 9 years of coalition government has gone on, we've had to. I've found that I've had to shift my political focus towards climate emergency and integrity in government, just because our government's not addressing these issues, which would be really fundamental. So I'd like to get back to the possibilities of the technological possibilities of the future. But that has just had to be one part of my campaign, and I've felt a need to focus on climate change and integrity in government.
So what about you, Ian?
Okay, well, my degrees were in physics and electrical engineering, and I worked mainly as an aerospace engineer for various space companies with rockets and aircraft mainly, and satellites. I used to lecture at university for 7 years, created various courses on space science, lots of fun, retired from that, and tried to use some of my scientific training to solve human problems, which included a role in the Secular Party. We saw that religion was one of the major things stopping the application of science and personal freedoms to the betterment of humanity. So the secular party aimed to separate church and state. And we identified a decade ago, about $31 billion was left unaccounted for by charities which have the religious umbrella over them and protect them from scrutiny by the government and the tax office. So we were hoping that in a simplistic view, you could remove the word religion from most of politics, so they'd be subject to the same rules as everyone else, and that would hopefully recover most of that 31 billion, which could benefit schools and hospitals. And not only that, but if the churches weren't protected by the idea of them being a law unto themselves, that would have perhaps avoided much of the child abuse which we see being revealed in recent years. So for me, secularism is one of the important pillars of propping up the application of science for the benefit of mankind.
So why did you guys join the Fusion Party? Or well, as the science party for you, Andrea, and the secular party for you, Ian?
Yeah, I was living in the electorate of Kingsford Smith in 2013, and there was a future party candidate on the ballot. So looking at the huge list of Senate candidates that I was going to research that time, I thought, where am I going to start? So I started looking up the Future Party because they were on the lower house ballot. So that's, there's so much value in being able to run lower house candidates because it grabs attention. And then I looked at the policies and I thought, oh, this is fantastic. So there's policies on high-speed rail, like trying to build the infrastructure of the future, looking at space exploration, looking at treating aging as a disease. And if I can explain this one across the course of the podcast, I'll be happy, because we get a lot of questions about treating aging as a disease. And trying to regulate our online activity in such a way that we're not being spied on online by our governments without a warrant. So again, all these future technologies I found really exciting and important. And that inspired me to join a political party. And then late last year, some legislation was brought in, like pushed through Parliament really quickly by the major parties, to increase the requirements for small parties. So previously you had to have 500 members to remain registered, and that was increased very quickly to 1,500 members. Minimum membership to stay registered. So all the small parties were thrown into a bit of a tailspin. We looked around, had a chat with all of our contemporaries. The Pirate Party actually has a very similar broad policy platform to the Science Party, despite coming from somewhat different angles. And then the Secular Party and Climate Emergency Action Alliance both have deep policy expertise in their respective areas, and they fitted really well into the platform. And it was a really easy decision actually to amalgamate and form this larger, stronger party with representation now Senate candidates in 5 states across Australia this time around.
Okay, and from my point of view, I've been active in several other free thought groups, namely the Humanist Party, that believes, the Humanist Society, I should say, in New South Wales and Australia, which believes that humans have to be responsible for their own welfare. They believe there are no deities upstairs who are going to look after you, or that you can call upon to look after you. So unlike Scott Morrison, we don't believe in miracles. We believe that miracles are made by humans, and we should encourage humans to do good work. I've also been in Skeptics for 40 odd years, where for most of that time I've been a lead investigator mainly with things to do with science. And there have been many claims in recent decades for things that generate energy from nothing, or improve the efficiency of your car, or you plug them into the power point and they halve your power bills, and so forth. So I investigate and report on those regularly, some from Australia and some overseas. That's what I've been doing. And then the secular party was founded by a wealthy benefactor in around something like 2005. And that was enough to attract a core group of people together, which then formed a association and then a registered party. And they didn't get anyone in Parliament, but they had a voice on many forums, which was very useful to show that, in fact, separation, if you separate church from state, then government will work much better. It'll remove one of the impediments to, as I said, the application of science to the benefit of humanity. And then, as Andrea said, the individual small parties had great difficulty being viable after the Electoral Commission changed the rules, and to join together with a lot of people, other parties that we found were like-minded in the end to form the Fusion Party. I think it's a great step forward.
So how did you guys end up becoming the Fusion Party candidates for the Senate seats in on the New South Wales ticket?
Yeah, so we've sort of, due to the time constraints, we've kind of retained our old parties as branches within the Fusion Party, and we've gone through those existing party structures in order to get endorsed as candidates by the party. So we just put in our applications as per usual. And one of the benefits of a small party is that when you've got good representatives, there tends to be the ability to move people around within the electorates or move to their neighbouring electorate if they live near, if they live on the border of two electorates, so that more people who are good representatives of the party can get a run and bring their ideas to the voting public.
And from my point of view, I stood for the Senate 3 times in past elections. As I said, however, we didn't get very much of the vote, unfortunately, but I learned a few lessons from that. Effective ways to put leaflets in letterboxes and effective ways to hand out leaflets on election day, polling day, outside the polling station. And I drew some statistics from that. I found that you have to put 100 leaflets in letterboxes to attract 1 vote. So you certainly need a lot of helpers if you're to make a big impression that way, but every little bit helps. And every bit of exposure the party gets is a benefit for the future, as I see it.
Yeah, we've found that having volunteers at the polling places on election day really does boost your vote, because people don't know what the small parties are about necessarily when they arrive at the polling booth. So as much as we talk about running the gauntlet of having everyone thrusting their flyers at you, for a small party, it's really important to have that people power on the ground.
So what would be your main policies you would help pass through if you got in and became a senator?
Climate emergency is the big one for me and a lot of our candidates. We've got a really embarrassing track record in Australia of just dithering on climate policy, going nowhere, having weak targets for emissions reductions and not having a plan to even reach those weak targets. We have a target of reaching net zero emissions within 10 years and then continuing to draw down carbon dioxide, because it's not just that we need to stop emitting greenhouse gases, it's that we need to return the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to a safe level, to what it used to be for all the time that we've been building cities. Our cities are not built to cope with the climate we have now, and it's putting lives in danger. We have heat waves that kill people in summer due to heat stress. We've got the more frequent and more severe natural disasters. I say natural disasters, the bushfires and floods that are more severe because of the changing climate. We've also got a policy of 800% renewables. So we think about climate change and we think about, doom and gloom. It's going to be very difficult to get out of this situation. And it is going to require leadership and a lot of decisive action and strong leadership. But it's also a really big opportunity, because we have to bring in a whole new industry, and that can be characterized by electrifying everything. So once we switch over our fossil fuel sources of energy to non-fossil fuel sources of energy, we don't stop there. We keep going. We have a policy of supporting a target of 800% renewable energy. And this is another one where people say, what does that mean? You can't have more than 100%. But Australia, as we know, is a big exporter of coal. We export 7-8 times more coal than we burn in Australia. So you could call that 800% coal. If we were to produce 8 times more electricity than we use in Australia through renewable energy means, that would be 800% renewables. And that's what we're looking to do, to improve the availability of energy, build all that generation infrastructure, bring industry onshore. So there's things that we don't do in Australia because the energy is expensive. We mine iron ore and then ship that overseas and buy the iron back as steel, when we could be doing that onshore with plentiful renewable energy. So that's a real priority for me and a lot of Fusion candidates this election.
Yes, I can agree with that. If I was in Parliament, I'd like to point out to some of the right-wingers and those dragging their action on climate change and some Queenslanders that in fact, we recall Scott Morrison came into Parliament with a lump of coal and said, this is coal, don't be afraid, it won't hurt you. I would say, oh yes, it will. Coal has already changed the climate, and it's the major element in warming the planet, which has already destroyed half of the Great Barrier Reef. So if Queensland wants a tourist industry to be left, and if we want some natural environment, we've got to stop burning coal before the rest of the Barrier Reef is set for destruction, if it isn't already. So that's one thing I'd like to do. And I'd also like to confront Scott Morrison and say, tell me, Scott, do you get giddy every time you do a backflip? Because you've already done it on electric cars, on an integrity commission, on net zero, and so many other things. So there's some questions I'd ask.
The integrity commission is another big one for me as well. It's been the rate at which scandals seem to be coming out of Parliament House, just it turns your head, and it's incredible that it barely makes the news anymore. So I grew up in the Howard era. So there were a lot of policies there that I disagreed with from that government, but at least there seems to be a semblance of accountability and respectability. If you did the wrong thing, you'd be held accountable for it. But now it's just the latest story of the day, and then it passes by.
So with the Senate ticket, because people can get confused, I've talked about this before on previous podcasts, but the massive long white piece of paper is the one you guys will be on, and there's 2 ways of voting. There's above the line and below the line. So why should they either vote for number 1 for the Fusion Party above the line, or you guys individuals below the line?
Yeah, we do get the question a lot. Also, where are your preferences going? So that refers to the old way of voting, where you just put a 1 above the line. That hasn't been the case since 2016. So there's a lot of confusion there still. And that's fair enough, because it was like that for 30 years. So we recommend the parties that align best with our values above the line on our website, and they're the parties that we would want to see elected if we don't. However, we would hope that we would, of course, be elected. We're in it to win it, to bring these policies to Parliament. Of declaring a climate emergency to hold the government accountable for its actions and policies in that space, a federal anti-corruption commission with teeth, and all of our other policies that are really just designed at giving Australians a fair go. So that might be a bit of a cliche, but making sure we have strong public education funding and funding for Medicare, including putting dental and mental health care under Medicare.
Yes, and there's something that another thing I'd like to point out in Parliament, and that is we have Barnaby Joyce and others saying they want to look out for their constituents' jobs, and their constituents, many of them mine coal. And I'd like to point out that, in fact, everyone, that's 100% of people working in the coal industry today, knowingly entered the coal industry within the last 40 years. And for longer than 40 years, scientists have been very clearly pointing out that, in fact, burning coal is changing the climate. And if we keep burning it, it must change the climate catastrophically. So every one of the coal workers today actually voluntarily entered the industry, having been warned that it would ruin the planet. So I think that's something that isn't appreciated by a lot of the Barnaby Joyces and Bob Catters who want to keep jobs for people in their electorate. They could have, over the last 40 years, they could have been diverting those jobs to things like solar panels and renewable energy and storage and better transmission and lots of useful energy technologies. So it's a pity that had the governments over the last 40 years had better policies, they would have been making this transition long ago, and we wouldn't be in this perceptual crunch at the moment where it's coal jobs or nothing.
And to support people who are moving industries, which is going to be necessary, we do also support it's been referred to as universal basic income, but we're not too hung up about the implementation as long as there is a guaranteed livable income for everyone above the poverty line without any of the strings attached that Centrelink applies at the moment. So none of these job search diaries that force people to go to their local business, even though there's fewer jobs than there are people looking for work. Just a guaranteed livable income for people to pay for the basics while they might not have a job or while they're retraining as well. The future is going to see a lot of changes, and we'd like to see people ready for that and supported.
It's one thing I like about the universal basic income is that you could sack hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats whose job it is to keep track of pensioners and workers and how many hours worked and what forms they filled in and what tax they might or might not have paid. Because once you simply give everyone a universal basic income, you can do away with that very large amount of bookkeeping to work out what everyone gets. So there'd be a great saving alone in that direction, which would do great to benefit society, both in relieving that bureaucratic burden and also in freeing people from the stress and worry of things like the robo-debt in Centrelink, which was so devastatingly harmful. So I think that's a side benefit of the universal basic income.
I should also mention that we oppose the cashless welfare card as a mandatory measure. So if someone wants to receive their income support in the form of a cashless card, then that should be an option. But forcing people onto that card is just as cruel as it is absurd and a rort.
So how has campaigning for the election been going so far?
It's interesting in a time of COVID. We're trying to get out there and hand out flyers and meet our potential voters. There's always a small core of people who are very proactive in seeking out information about the minor parties, smaller and newer parties. And I think many of your listeners would fall into that category. There are a lot of people interested in particular issues who are sending through emails to us. So that's a that's one way we can connect with voters, and we've had a lot of those communications. It is difficult because, you know, we don't get invited to the debates on the TV with the, the major parties. And I sometimes wonder why that is. There's no good reason for that. We're vying for we're contesting, we're throwing our hat into this contest of ideas. And I think the voters deserve to know about the options that are on the table.
Yes, it would be very nice to get someone into Parliament, of course, but it would also be beneficial if we could get someone on the Q&A where they get a fair exposure. So that's been one of my aims, and it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Sometimes you just need a little bit of television exposure or $70 million to run a few ads.
Indeed, yes, Clive Palmer and Craig Kelly have been spending an amazing amount of money on what seems basically a worthless thing to me. That's a bit of a puzzle.
Whereas we rely entirely on donations from individuals.
Well, that's why I like doing this as well. Like, it's called Christians Political Talks, but it's also for not just, you know, the major parties or the parties that I align with. It's for the entire range of the political compass, which when you look into it, it is actually pretty big, like, because there are a lot of separate parties. Like, you know, parties could be very similar, but on the political compass, they could be like a couple of centimeters apart. It's very fascinating when you've been looking into it.
Yeah, we found also the ABC is not necessarily, talking of Vote Compass, as you might have been, the ABC is not necessarily supportive of the idea of publicising smaller political parties. So the major parties get shown on the Vote Compass, and you can see how well you align with them. But there are 30-something registered political parties. So I just think voters would appreciate knowing who they actually align the most with.
So do you have anything to say to the other candidates running for the Senate seats in New South Wales that might potentially be listening?
Oh, just good luck, I suppose, and we'll see you on the hustings.
And I would perhaps encourage them to consider joining us or vice versa, because we find, as Andrea said, there are so many little parties which have been competing one against the other. There's one group, I'm in a climate change group called Climate Change Balmain Roselle, and I find they've been distributing leaflets which seem very contrary to understand why they list the preferences the way they do, that who to prefer on the ballot. And perhaps the climate emergency group that joined the Fusion Party, I think that says it all. And perhaps some of the other groups would benefit from joining. But of course, a lot of people like to be a big fish in a little pond. They like to be the head, the chief, the head honcho, the all-powerful organizer of some group, even if it's a very small group, and perhaps their ego wouldn't allow them to join a larger group. So I would say to the other candidates, please consider consolidating our efforts, and that way we can get greater leverage.
So the Fusion Party, I was looking at the numbers of candidates throughout the entire Senate, throughout the entire country. So I don't think you guys have enough numbers to form a majority Senate. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yes. Yep. So out of the two major parties that generally form a major Senate or House of Reps, which Labor and Liberal, who would you guys prefer to have a majority Senate, or would you rather a hung parliament?
Yes. I think we've been taught to fear a hung parliament, when I think another way of looking at it would be a more collaborative government, where actually the people voted in to represent us have to negotiate with each other to try and find the best outcome. So I'd be very happy to see a hung parliament.
Yes, indeed. Any party that holds all the power for too long, what I suspect is that corruption starts to seep into them. Once once they realise that they're in a very powerful position and can't be really threatened very effectively, start degenerating perhaps. So I think a hung parliament and a change of government is usually beneficial in that way.
So if anyone listening is keen to help out you guys or the Fusion Party itself, how would they go to enlist in to volunteer?
Get in touch with us any way you can. Our website is fusionparty.org.au, and we've got a button there where you can fill out a volunteer form. But if you find us online as well, just drop us a line. We're on Facebook and Twitter, and to some extent, Instagram and TikTok.
So do you have any social media, Ian, or any emails, or you guys have the same?
I have more limited use of social media. There was a cartoon in the Herald. You probably wouldn't know the Herald. That's an old physical newspaper made of tree leaves, believe it or not. The cartoon there was called Non Sequitur, and it said old style social media. And the man standing at a window holding placards up to his window so the neighbours can see, and his wife's there with a list directing him who to hold the placard towards the window in the next building, 3 up and 2 left. You send this message that says, would you like to come round for a cup of tea? And to them, you send some other message. So that was his means of old style social media. So, so sometimes I laugh at that, but sometimes it's a bit close to the bone. Now, as for political campaigning, in past years, I've done a lot of walking around, wearing out pairs of shoes, stuffing letterboxes, and on polling day handing up leaflets. So I do a bit on Facebook and Twitter, but not so much as physical contact. Also, the various societies I'm in, I tell them about the what the Fusion Party's up to. It used to be what the secular party's up to, and quite a few of them expressed an interest and said they visited the website and like what they see and will consider voting for us. So word of mouth. Once you're a retiree, you're in various groups, which include University of the Third Age, U3A, and Probus, and I already mentioned the humanists and the skeptics. There's also the rationalists and the atheists, and the WEA. So all of these groups I do as much as I can to make the members that I see aware of what's going on in politics and what the benefits that they might get by considering the Fusion Party.
So do you have any other comments you would like to say to the listeners?
Well, I did promise that I would talk about aging as a disease. So if I can just cover that topic off really quickly.
Yeah,
we
go
do
ahead.
get a lot of questions about aging as a disease. It's one of our policies, and it's all about making our lives longer and healthier. So we think it is good that people stay alive and bad when people die. So we tend to think of aging and death as a natural, unavoidable process because it has been for so long. We have diseases of aging that we tend to accept just happen as you get older. We don't think we should have to accept that. And in the first instance, what it's going to mean that we find treatments and cures for some of the things we've accepted as diseases of aging, so that we live longer, healthier lives, like living healthier lives for longer until we're ready to die. It's a bit of an uncomfortable topic. But also, one of the main reasons for government, we think, getting involved in declaring aging as a disease and working towards a cure is that if you have some of these diseases of aging or some of the aches and pains that go along with aging, and you go to the doctor, then you just get told, oh, well, you're getting old, sorry. Whereas there are drugs that could be prescribed to people if aging was treated as a disease. So it's a regulatory issue as well, that if you go to the doctor with these symptoms of aging, then if aging was treated as a disease, then you could be prescribed drugs to relieve those symptoms and live a longer, healthier life.
It would be nice to live a longer life, especially a healthier life as well, because most of the time when people get older, they do generally get diseases. Like most known one is cancer. A lot of my family has died from cancer, so it would be nice to get a treatment for cancer. It would be nice. And it also, a personal one for me is I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I would love to have like a artificial pancreas or something. So instead of having to shove needles in my stomach about 6 times a day, it just back to normal, like a true healthy body.
Yeah, we've got a policy of doubling funding for scientific research as well. So not just medical research, but across the board, to just have more life-saving and life-changing discoveries. Australia does so much fantastic scientific work, and it's not well supported as it should be.
Yes, Christian, in my other interests also recognise that quality of life is equally important as quantity, which means that we pay attention to things like abortion rights. That's under threat in the USA now due to the Supreme Court being stacked up with Trump appointees. What a shame. And voluntary assisted dying and how that can be made beneficial. So the emphasis is on quality of life, not quantity. I was dismayed to see a so-called ethicist from Australian Catholic University the other days, when she was asked about her views on voluntary assisted dying, said people seem to have forgotten that suffering is good for the soul. Well, I don't think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so well, thanks for joining us today, Andrea and Ian.
Thank you, Christian.
Thanks, Christian. That was great.
Yeah. So you can follow their party on Facebook at Fusion Party Australia and on Instagram at Fusion Party Oz. You can follow me on Facebook at Christians Political Talks and the same on Instagram at Christians Political Talks. Further details will be in the description of this episode. Special thanks to everyone who tuned in to listen to today's episode, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.
Bye.